it is December, which means that my reading year has come to a close, or is about to come to a close. Obviously, I still have like 10 books that I would like to read before the close of the year, but I always like to, around this time, assess what I think is predicted going to be my favorite book of the year, because about, like, at this point, I kind of already know. I kind of know what books I'm going to be reading this month, and I don't think that any of them are going to become my favorite. That does not mean that there's never been a late run, but usually that doesn't happen with me. Usually December isn't the time for the heavy hitters, and that's okay. My favorite book for January was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. Vengeful is the sequel to, I believe the series is called Villains. The first book is called Vicious. And I guess I'll tell you about Vicious because I don't want to spoil anything for Vengeful. It is a slow, like, villains and heroes kind of story. It's like the Bildungsroman of both this supervillain and this superhero in this community. However, I would say that it harkens away from the usual, like, cheesiness of normal, like, superheroes and villains movies. These are real people who live in the real world, and they happen to get superpowers, and this is kind of the first book, Vicious, is the process in how they get these superpowers, what it took, and why these people who used to be friends are now mortal enemies. You know, the good old shtick. This is a book of very, very morally gray characters, very interesting takes on morality and on ethics. The cost of survival for most of these characters is, in a lot of ways, their humanity, and it's just really cool. It's a really fun read. Funnily enough, I think I prefer Vicious to Vengeful, but it was my favorite for the month of July. My favorite for the month of February was The Bear and the Nightingale, I believe by Catherine Arden. This is the first, I read the whole trilogy actually this year, but this is the first book in the trilogy. Bear and the Nightingale was very atmospheric. I think reading it during the winter was the perfect time to read it. Frankly, I read the other two books not in the winter, and it didn't hit the same. There's, the book takes place in Russia in winter. I mean, other seasons in Russia too, but deep winter in Russia, and it focuses a lot on Russian folklore and mythos, and it's so visceral. It's so good at, like, making you feel cold the whole time. The story is about this young woman, this girl in the beginning of the book, who grows up and is slowly discovering that she's magical and what that entails, while also trying to live in a community that is very strictly Christian and very strictly patriarchal. So it has, like, a feminist lean to it, it has a magical lean to it, and it's just, like, really beautiful. It's very beautiful writing, very atmospheric, very lovely to read, and also has, like, really intense villains. Like, I think that The Bear and the Nightingale has just some really awful villains, and I appreciated that a lot. So I think it was a mixture of, like, good timing on the part of, like, seasonal reading, and also just, it was a beautiful book, a beautiful, I wouldn't say magical realism, like, fairy tale retellings I never know how to, like, categorize outside of fairy tale retellings, but because this one I don't believe is actually, like, a straight up fairy tale, but you get my drift. For March, my favorite book that I read was The Kingdoms by Natasha Pulley. And this is going to start a theme. So this book jump-started, like, a major part of my reading. So I read The Kingdoms. I picked up The Kingdoms initially because it has such a beautiful cover. And when I saw it at the library, I kept getting drawn to it. I was like, this is gorgeous. I didn't know nothing about this book or this author, but, like, I'm just drawn to it. I think it's gorgeous. And when I read the blurb, it's about like, it includes essentially like a portal, like fantasy element, and a little bit of a time travel element, and amnesia, which I love as a plot point. And it takes place in part in the Hebrides Islands, which is one of my bucket list locations to go to. So I was so excited. I was like, say less, Hebrides Islands, like freaking lighthouse, I'm there. And it is so achingly good. So good. This turned out not to be my favorite Natasha Pulley book, but it's definitely still, I would say, like my second favorite. This one takes place in a London where the English lost the Battle of Trafalgar. And so they're currently occupied by France and have like weird regulations, and it's kind of sad. It's like an alternate history. And it includes our main character, Joe, who has like very few memories of his past. He like was found at a train station, didn't remember his name, didn't remember shit. And he's trying to sort of like piece together whatever he can find as to like who he is and what he was doing. Somebody claims him as somebody that they knew, but there's this implication that maybe it's not true, or there's more to his backstory than what they can tell him. And a month after he like wakes up at a train station and doesn't remember who he is, a letter comes in the mail for him that says, "Come home if you remember." And it's a postcard of this lighthouse in the Hebrides Islands. My camera was like, no, fuck you, Natasha Pulley. No, we're not learning about the watchmaker of Filigree Street today. Okay, so the watchmaker of Filigree Street is about Thaniel Steepleton. He's this guy, he works in the international section, in the international department of the government. And he's tasked with learning Japanese and spying on his newfound roommate, who is believed to be a terrorist, but is actually just a Japanese watchmaker. So you've got like Thaniel trying to navigate like becoming friends and then more than friends with this watchmaker, and also thinking that he's secretly a terrorist. It's very adorable. Obviously, like the covers are fucking phenomenal. Very sweet, has neurodivergent representation, and I really flippin' enjoyed it. I will say, unlike popular opinion, apparently people don't really like The Kingdoms. I think I liked The Kingdoms more than The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, just because I think that I don't know, I think it was more up my alley. Not that this one isn't, but I think this one's very sweet and very queer and lovely as well. Okay, so in May, you can fucking see the theme. So in May, my favorite book of the month was The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow, which is the third and final installation of The Watchmaker of Filigree Street. And it is a massive book, but it takes place a couple years after the events of The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, and involves Keita and Thaniel going to Japan and interacting with chance and history there. I don't want to ruin it because there's a lot of things that happen in The Watchmaker of Filigree Street that obviously lead into The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow, but I thought that it was an excellent conclusion. I think that it was, out of the trilogy, my favorite. So that just goes to show, you know what I mean? It just keeps going up from there. Fully enjoyed. In June, I got into the summer spirit by reading Call Me By Your Name. And it was my favorite for the month of June. I don't know if that means that it was a light month for good books. You'll kind of find this year, July was a really hard month for me to choose my favorite, because it had literally 7 5-star reads for me. So certain months, I feel like it's a little bit unfair. I never know if I never know how to make the bracketing more fair. But the one that came out on top for June was Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. This is the book that produced the Timothée Chalamet movie, and it's equally as devastating. I think Call Me By Your Name is a difficult book, obviously, because it's a book discussing statutory rape, and if statutory rape in a positive light, which I get, is fucking sucky. I think this book came out on top just because writing-wise, it was so, truly so good. And I think that there's like a place for this discussion that does not necessarily erase it from the literature spectrum. Like, I think that we can discuss this book and discuss what it's trying to do without completely like busting it out of places. I know that, obviously there's a lot of issue with having a book about gay men or queer men where one of them is underage. Like, this is something that is a ridiculous and horrible stereotype that people have to live with, and I think that in that spectrum, like, obviously there's a place and time for it, but honestly, it's just a beautiful read. Like, it's difficult because it's a beautiful read, but it's also fucked up. So that's that. July, the one that actually came on top, and this was so, July and August, man, this was hard, was What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher, I will literally purchase anything that she writes. Anything fucking at all. And this one made me really excited. This was one of my most anticipated books of this year. That's because it is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, written by T. Kingfisher. And I was like, fucking say less, let me pre-order this. I actually read this when I was sick with COVID, and it was a wonderful time. It's exceptionally short. It's a novella. And if you know The Fall of the House of Usher, then you kind of know what the plot would likely be. This includes non-binary rep. The main character is non-binary, and it takes place in kind of a weird little world. And I freaking enjoyed this to the maximum. I thought that it was so good. I think that T. Kingfisher is so clever with her writing and so creepy in a like actually interesting way. So I was really excited that she's publishing more. For August, my favorite book of the month was also Natasha Pulley. It was her newest release, which was actually released in 2022, which was The Half-Life of Valerie Kaye. And if I were to be a betting man, I would say that this is probably going to be my favorite book of the year. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think that probably people who have read Natasha Pulley's books would disagree. And that's fine. I liked it a lot because it had this like gut-wrenching yearning that Natasha Pulley does every fucking time. But on top of that, this book takes place in Soviet Russia. Our main character, Valery, is a currently imprisoned nuclear scientist. And he is in prison because, a lot of people were in prison during Soviet Russia, and he is removed from prison in order to work on this project that includes radiation in this town. And it's based on real events that came out in Russia. I can't remember which nuclear explosion it's based on, but it's based on a real town that the USSR claimed wasn't as irradiated as it was, but was exceptionally irradiated. And so Valery's figuring this out and trying to figure out how to help people, and all the while he's falling in love with this guy, and it's so beautiful. I think the representation of autism in this book is fucking just peak. As somebody who has an autistic partner, it makes me so fucking happy to see a love interest that's like my love interest. Does that make sense? Like to see somebody who is attractive for the same reasons that my person's attractive. And I thought that Pulley did a really good job at doing that with this book. I thought that, like, the science was really fun. I loved it. I loved it so fucking much. It has been many, many days, and I didn't finish this video, so here we go. Sorry I'm not in a cuter outfit, but it's pajama time. So my September book was A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows. This was one of the books I got for my birthday. Woo. So this book is a solid, like, over 500 pages. It took me, like, 3 days to read. So it was very quick. I believe it's actually a teen book. I'm not sure. Please, for this one, watch the trigger warnings. This book does have a rape at the very beginning of the book, and it is pretty pertinent to the plot. So take care of yourself. Make sure that you're doing what you need to do. I will say that I think that because of the rape, I wouldn't say that it's for everybody. However, I do think that it's a really beautiful story. Very interesting cultural politics that are here. So it includes a marriage of convenience between Valasin, who is a, like, noble from one country, and Kaithari, who is a prince from another. So in order to make their cultures kind of see more eye to eye, and also to protect Valasin in the aftermath of his trauma, they end up getting married. And I love marriage of conveniences. I'm a sucker for that shit. And I think that it was done very well here. I think if you've liked or read the Captive Prince series by C.S. Packet, then you would really, really like this book. It has the same sort of vibes, queer romance that's based on two fantasy cultures that are just kind of different and interesting and spicy. And so I really liked it. I liked the spice level. I liked the very deft hand at dealing with sexual assault, and the court dynamics were just really interesting. So really enjoyed this one. In October, my favorite book was Babel, or The Necessity of Violence by R.F. Kuang. This, I don't feel like I need to talk about this one very much because I feel like everyone's been talking about it this year. I initially read it because I was like, it can't be worth this hype. And I will say I did very much enjoy it. I think as somebody who studied the classics and studied foreign languages in my undergrad, I thought that it was really cool. I liked their discussion about language in relation to colonization. I think that R.F. Kuang really encapsulated this time in English history where everything was being taken from everybody else. I think that people tend to forget that this is something that is ongoing, that England still takes from everybody else and is still repressing and in control of a lot of different people groups and communities. And I think that this book really highlighted that, while also highlighting their past mistakes in a really interesting way. I think the magic system in this book is so interesting. Focusing on translation, it made me really happy. It reminded me of what I went to school for and the sort of things that I love learning, and it was just my kind of book. It was my kind of vibe. And the last book, the last favorite book of the year, is kind of a surprise, actually. It's White Horse by Erica T. Worth. And I say that this is a surprise because a lot of times I choose the book that is my favorite, if that makes sense. So, like, a lot of times I have, like, kind of handpicked the book that's my favorite. Not that Book of the Month hasn't shown me some really great favorites in the past. However, I think that to get it to the top of my monthly list is kind of rare. It's just kind of rare. But White Horse really got me. really got me. I thought that this was so much fun. I thought that it was genuinely creepy, which I think it doesn't happen to me a lot when I'm reading horror. I don't think that I have like a high like horror tolerance. I just think that like it's really hard for something to get to me, if that makes sense. Like there's a certain kind of horror that like actually creeps me out. But most of the time I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, or like, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't actually freak me out. This book is neon. Does that make sense? Like everything, all of the settings in this book are amazing. This is in so many ways a love letter to Denver and the surrounding areas. And it like shows. It shows in every single setting. In the main character's apartment, in the roller rink that they're in the fact that one of her friends has a secondary apartment that they're turning into a mini golf course. There's so many places in this book that are just so beautiful and so fun and so wicked. Like it adds to the fact that we're also seeing like a very creepy ghost throughout the story. So it's like, you know, you're at the roller rink and then you're seeing this like really horrifying like ghost lady. Like the combination is just so good. It's so atmospheric and fun to read. It involves our main character Carrie, who recently inherits a item from her deceased mother. She's never really known her mom, kind of has a bad like relationship with the memory of her mom. So this is kind of one of those like, I don't know about this present kind of thing. But when she receives this present, she begins seeing the ghost of her dead mother, and she has to figure out what the fuck happened to her, and on top of that, what the fuck happened to her community. But anyway, friends, those are my favorite books of 2022 so far, discluding December's. Let me know what your favorite books are this year, and let's enjoy next year. See you later.